الجلسة العلمية الخامسة، وستكون بعنوان مستقبل المصارف الإسلامية بين التحديات والفرص الواعدة. يرأس هذه الجلسة سعادة الأستاذ عبد المحسن الفارس، الرئيس التنفيذي والعضو المنتدب لمصرف الإنماء من مايو 2006 حتى يناير 2021، فليتفضل مشكورا. السادة المتحدثون: الدكتور عثمان شدري، رئيس إدارة المخاطر ومدير مجلس الإدارة في بنك جيتهوس. كذلك الدكتور وائل عيد، رئيس إدارة المخاطر والحوكمة وعضو لجنة الاستثمار في كيو انفست قطر. وكذلك سعادة الدكتور بلو دانتابا، الأمين العام السابق لمجلس الخدمات المالية الإسلامية في ماليزيا. أما المعقبون فهم معالي تانسيري عبد الواحد بن عمر، رئيس مجلس الإدارة في بورصة ماليزيا، والأستاذ أستاذنا الدكتور منذر قحف، أستاذ الاقتصاد والتمويل الإسلامي بكلية الاقتصاد والإدارة جامعة اسطنبول صباح الدين زعيم، فليتفضلوا جميعا مشكورين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اسمحوا لي باسمي وباسم المتحدثين والمعقبين أولا أن أشكر الأخوة المنظمين لهذه الندوة على الجهود التي بذلت وعلى المواضيع التي طرحت، وأيضا على الإثراء الكبير للقطاع الحقيقة فيما يتعلق بما تم خلال اليومين الماضيين، وأسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يكون هناك فيه نفعا عاما، ونأمل أن تخرج التوصيات ويكون لها إطار عملي إن شاء الله للتنفيذ في المستقبل. نحن اليوم في الجلسة الخامسة. عنوان الجلسة مستقبل المصارف الإسلامية بين التحديات والفرص الواعدة، وهذه الجلسة تركز على 3 محاور رئيسية. الحقيقة المحور الواحد ربما يكون عنوان لمؤتمر كامل. المحاور هي: المحور الأول التحديات التشريعية والقانونية، المحور الثاني الابتكار في المصرفية الإسلامية من تطوير المنتجات إلى التكنولوجيا المالية، والمحور الثالث أيضا التنافسية العالمية، كيف يمكن للمصارف الإسلامية قيادة السوق العالمي بعد مرور 50 عاما. قبل أن نبدأ الندوة، إذا يسمحوا لي زملائي وأخواني الأعزاء المتحدثين أن نلتزم بالوقت قدر الإمكان، وإذا كان في توفير الوقت فبيكون جدا، لأن طريقة الجلسة سيكون المتحدث باختصار شديد، ثم نرجع للمتحدثين أيضا يكون نقاش بينهم في وقت محدد، ثم يتاح المجال أيضا للحضور للمداخلات والأسئلة المباشرة لأي متحدث منكم، أو أيضا للتعليق على جزئية معينة في هذه المحاور المهمة. ونبدأ بإذن الله في المحور الأول، وهو بعنوان التحديات التشريعية والقانونية. ولدينا ورقة مقدمة من سعادة الدكتور عثمان شودري، وهو رئيس إدارة المخاطر ومدير مجلس الإدارة بنك جيتا هاوس، وانضم إلى بنك جيتا هاوس كرئيس تنفيذي المخاطر في يناير 2018، وقبل ذلك شغل مناصب سابقة في بنك تاندم والبنك الرائد في مجال التقنية الرقمية كمدير للمخاطر أيضا، وفي بنك ستاندرد تشارترز حيث شغل منصب الرئيس العالمي لحوكمة وسياسات المخاطر. وموضوع ورقة البحثية التحديات التشريعية والقانونية، وآمل أن يلتزم بالوقت بما لا يتجاوز 10 دقائق. تفضل.
Thank you, Chairman. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here with all of you. As the slide says, I wanted to provide a UK perspective on Islamic banking, opportunities, challenges, legal and regulatory considerations. Before I kick off, I think it's quite poetic that we're here at the Al-Barkah Forum. It was in 1982 that the Al-Barkah Group first planted the seed in the UK of Islamic finance. So I think it's quite nice to be here to comment on Islamic finance many decades later. Well, what we've seen in the past 2 decades in particular has been a significant and rapid increase and growth in Islamic finance in the UK. A slow start from the 1980s, but a significant and rapid increase in the UK. So how has the UK achieved this significant increase? Well, the UK has strategically positioned itself as a leading Western hub for Islamic finance, and this hasn't been by chance. A cornerstone of this success is the commitment to a level playing field regulatory approach. This means that Islamic financial institutions operate under the same standards as their conventional counterparts, as mandated by the UK Financial Services and Marketing Act. The FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, and the Prudential Regulatory Authority, two components of the Bank of England, are charged with overseeing banking in the UK, including Sharia banks. Their regulatory stance is best described as no obstacles, but no special favours. While Islamic institutions don't receive preferential treatment, regulation also doesn't hinder their operations, making the UK an attractive place for Islamic finance in the West. And crucially, as a secular nation, the UK does not regulate Sharia compliance. The responsibility of Sharia compliance lays squarely with the relevant supervisory Sharia boards of the financial institutions. Finally, the UK has a proactive regulatory landscape and legal landscape. The tax legislation continues to evolve. There is an open dialogue between the government, the central bank, and the Sharia banks to ensure that where there are obstacles, these are mitigated and neutralised. The tax treatment chiefly now largely follows the economic substance of transactions, whether it's interest-based or Sharia compliant, benefiting products like the Marhaba, diminishing musharaka, and sukuk. Several factors have been instrumental in the growth of Islamic finance in the UK. Firstly, the support, as I mentioned earlier, from the Bank of England, chiefly around managing liquidity risk. This is a key driver and a critical core function of banking along with capital requirements. The establishment of the Sharia-compliant Alternative Liquidity Facility, the ALF, in the UK has been critical in the support of Sharia banking, as traditional central banking facilities are interest-based. The ALF operates on a wakala fund model basis, where deposits are invested in Sharia-compliant assets, primarily sukuk. This allows Islamic banks to hold central bank assets as part of their liquidity asset buffers and meet international regulatory requirements. Secondly, the UK has become a significant hub in the West for sukuk markets. The LSE is an attractive venue for issuers worldwide. The UK itself has demonstrated commitment by issuing 2 sovereign sukuks. A thriving financial services ecosystem is another key driver. This includes a cluster of financial intermediaries, asset managers offering Islamic investment products, and a growing takaful sector. The UK's strength in legal, accounting, and consulting services, particularly based on English common law, are also crucial. And as we've heard previously earlier today and yesterday, the evolving and growing role of fintech is a significant role in the UK's general banking industry, but particularly the Sharia banking space. And I'll come on to that a little bit later. And this leads to the UK being a key Islamic fintech hub outside of the OIC countries, ranked high in the global Islamic fintech index. There's numerous companies like Algebra, Kestrel, Nesta, Nomo, which are fintech app-based organizations in the UK. So here we see a short graphic. It's an extract from a recent report. It clearly shows that despite there are a long tail of countries which have a significant presence in the Islamic finance sector, the UK is clearly in the top 5, a significant contributor to Islamic finance globally, and the leading banking centre for Islamic finance in the West. And as I mentioned, there are some key ingredients that certainly lessons can be learned in other evolving countries or countries where there is a great desire to foster Islamic finance. And I've spoken with some colleagues over the last 24, 48 hours discussing some of these raw ingredients that help catalyse the growth of Islamic finance. So while still a small percentage of the global market, the UK represents the majority of Islamic banking assets in Europe, excluding Turkey. The market is experiencing robust growth, driven by factors like growing Muslim population and the demand for Sharia-compliant products. We've heard about some of the banks across the West. There are 4 key main Sharia-compliant banks in the UK that are listed here. Just focused on Gatehouse Bank, for example, it's seen significant growth in recent years, almost double-digit CAGR. The bank has chiefly focused on outcomes, the purpose of Sharia finance, as opposed to the form of Sharia finance and the terminology of Sharia finance. Clearly, we are seeking to attract both Muslim and non-Muslim customers. So really there is a focus, as we heard earlier in the previous session, on ethical, on social, on environmental performances. This is something that the Gatehouse Bank has focused on, and it's really paid dividends in the UK. And here's a quick extract of research that we've performed recently. You see at the top, Islamic finance as a concept itself, as a terminology, has some level of resonance with non-Muslims, definitely with Muslims. But really when we start to talk about green finance and the ethical finance, so outcomes, purpose-driven, this really starts to resonate with more people. And we've tapped into this to grow the Islamic finance offering. And clearly this links closely with the ESG initiatives that we've discussed earlier. We've modified products in the UK to really focus on ESG, savings in terms of the environment. We've aligned with the United Nations principles on responsible banking. So we were there as a key signatory to the initial ESGs, and I believe probably the only Sharia bank that was there. I think this is great from a global perspective to raise the visibility of Islamic banking and how closely it aligns with the ESG principles that traditional banks are focusing on. Remaining challenges. Despite progress, several challenges remain. Firstly, while tax legislation has been amended, it continues to be an evolving piece. There's always new legislation, and there's always a desire to closely align with traditional financing and traditional lending. Differences in treatment between property refinancing is also a key consideration. This can have an impact on capital gains and capital allowances, although modest. Central banking tools, I talked earlier about the liquidity management facilities that the central bank has issued for the Sharia banks. It's a fantastic start. It's probably the most significant central banking tool for the Islamic markets in the West. It still has further to go in terms of its use test, the appetite across Islamic banks to continue using that. And I think that will feed into the central bank's desire to increase the necessary deposits available for the local banks. So this is a positive dialogue, and we have ongoing discussions with the Bank of England how they can help us further. I think a key element, as I've just mentioned in the previous slides, was the perception across Muslims and non-Muslims in the UK and chiefly the West around Islamic finance, what it can do for them in terms of their values. Public awareness is key in this regard. There is a greater need for education. So although we can go out there with a product, that in itself is not sufficient. There really is a need to push greater education into certainly the younger generation, who are very much principles-based, and there is also the older generation, which are probably more price-sensitive. There's certainly more we can do there. So here I want to talk a little bit more about the public awareness piece. So we clearly try to target our target market, which is the Muslim market itself. It's around 4% of the UK population, but growing fast, certainly in the UK and in the West. For them, there are question marks around options. So we work on providing a greater number of financing options, deposit saving options for those customers. They're largely comfortable with Islamic finance. For the non-Muslims, and this forms the broader addressable market, and this is key to gaining scale in the UK. Here, it's all about how Islamic finance achieves the outcomes that they want. They're not necessarily too concerned with the label of Islamic finance. They want to understand the outcomes it can achieve for them and their families. So ethical, social, the idea that the Islamic finance is not invested in and engages with prohibited activities. This is a real positive in the UK and in the West. Future opportunities quickly, without taking up too much time. significant opportunities in the UK. As I talked about earlier, there's a fast-growing UK Muslim population demographic. There is a broader demographic, non-Muslims, who are very keen to do financing of all types, regardless of Sharia, but I think they certainly like the opportunities that the Sharia finance can give them and align to their ethical values. Digital partnerships. There are 4 banks in the UK that are Sharia, but many more fintech organizations, circa 30 to 40 organizations. So a great tale of organizations if we look at terms of how many assets are under their control and management, but there is a need for partnership to really gain scale and increase the voice of Islamic finance in the UK. And this is something that actually Gatehouse Bank itself is working with, a Sharia-oriented fintech to gain scale and hopefully become more prominent across Europe. So hopefully I didn't take up too much time. I thank you for your time and your attention.
شكرا دكتور عثمان شودري وشكرا على الالتزام بالوقت. المحور الثاني يتعلق بأيضا موضوع مهم جدا وهو الابتكار في المصرفية الإسلامية من تطوير المنتجات إلى التكنولوجيا المالية، ومقدم الورقة البحثية هو سعادة الدكتور وائل عيد. والدكتور وائل عيد هو رئيس إدارة المخاطر والحوكمة وعضو لجنة الاستثمار كيو انفست في قطر، ويحمل درجة دكتوراه وفي إدارة المخاطر من جامعة دورهام، كما أنه حائز على جائزة جولدن هيوك إدارة المخاطر لعام 2015 من معهد المديرية المعروف عالميا، وهو مؤلف أيضا كتاب تحديد المخاطر وممارسات إدارات المخاطر في الصيرفة الإسلامية. للأسف الشديد لم يحضر نسخ لكم، ولكن هو الكتاب موجود أيضا بالدار اللي يرغب أن يقتني هذا الكتاب ويطلع عليه. هل هو موجود على الويب سايت ولا وموجود على الويب سايت؟ فنطلب من الدكتور أيضا التحدث عن ورقته وأيضا الالتزام بالوقت قدر الإمكان. شكرا.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الصلاة والسلام على أكرم المرسلين. I'm very excited and honored to be here to discuss a very important and much under-researched topic in banking in general and in Islamic banking in particular, which is innovation and the future of innovation in Islamic banking. Let me start by asking who in the room enjoys their banking experience? I'm not surprised, I'm like you, we don't enjoy it, but I have good news for you. We are currently going through the biggest transformation in banking history, which is the fintech, innovation, and AI. This is going to transform banking as we know it. We'll talk about Islamic banking in a minute, but banking is going to be different. Bankers of the future are going to be different from us, bankers of today. There will be different mindset, skill set, different backgrounds and education. There will be winners and losers in this revolution in banking. Historically, banks have been very good in innovation, product innovation, strategy innovation. But with the 2008 financial crisis, banks have been overwhelmed by fines, capital issues, regulatory changes, and struggling to find capital to survive. Innovation was a distant priority. But at the same time, there will be a lot of innovation happening in the fintech world. And the cloud computing, WhatsApp, Uber, Airbnb, innovation was happening everywhere, but not in banking at that period of time. So that shaped the customer experience. Customers got used from a customer-facing experience and overall experience to much more user-friendly, innovative interfaces, which they didn't find at their banks. This has created a gap between what the banks are offering and what the other providers are offering. But the gap was so big that even non-banking players jumped to capture the opportunity in this gap. So you find Apple Pay, Alibaba Pay. You find Facebook has the capability to transfer money from one user to another. You find Amazon giving peer-to-peer financing on the retail level. Alibaba is actually become one of the biggest money market funds in the world on a retail level. These tech giants jumped on an opportunity that they found a gap in the market. And that made the banks worry. Banks have to evolve and innovate not to miss the opportunity in this gap. Today, you have the robot advisory, which is giving not only a better financial advice to retail investors, but their fee structure is much more transparent and substantially cheaper than offered by the banks. This creates a new banking model for the future, where technology and innovation, and of course AI, play a much bigger role. AI robots, another example, are replacing call centers. The AI, conversational AI, is replacing the call centers that we all hate. A recent study is showing that 70% of millennials, the new generation, would prefer to go to the dentist than speak to the call center at the bank or to have a banking experience, which shows that banks need to innovate to get into the AI cycle to survive. Citibank, that will affect banking jobs, by the way. Citibank has an estimate that in the next 10 years, around 30% of banking jobs will disappear because of AI and innovation. There's another study saying that this will go up to 50%, meaning 1 in every 2 jobs in banking will disappear over the next 10 years. Some of you might argue that will be a good thing. There will be less bankers in the world. But this leads to my thing. We don't only need innovation in AI. We need a change in mindset. We need AI innovation to be a tool, but a change in the mindset of bankers and how they approach their banking experience. Talking about Islamic banks, there have been innovation at a bank level, but not at the macro industry level. So there have been very good examples. This is the international level. There have been very good examples in the Islamic finance, but this is at the product and individual bank level. Where is our innovation at the macro level? So going to the recommendations of my short speech, IOFI, IRLM, IFSB, Islamic banking organizations need to do like what we're doing here. Focus more on AI, on innovation. What is the future? How not to miss the opportunity of this transformational wave in banking? How not to follow, how to be the leaders in that. Finance courses, whether at universities, at forums like this, or even executive development courses at banks, need to have focus on innovation, on development. Because bankers of the future, as I said, are going to be different from bankers of today. They will be developers, they will have to have creative thinkers, they have to be tech savvy. Going to the final recommendations. AI is not a magic word. There are an innovation. There are certain drawbacks. It all depends on the data. Rank in, rank out. So it's not guaranteed that AI will give you the innovation. It's a platform. It's how you use it. There are challenges with regulation. How would the regulators accept the AI in their framework? There's a lot of work needed in the regulatory framework to adopt AI in decision making, in analysis, in risk management, and customer experience. How is audit going to audit the AI experience? Of course, data privacy is a major issue, with cybersecurity one of the highest risks facing banks and financial providers globally. First, how would the customer trust and advice and investment advice given by an AI, not by a human? Would the customer follow the AI advisory? And finally, how is the audit trail will happen? If an AI advice goes wrong, who is liable? Is an investment committee member, is the CEO of a bank, or who blames the AI? It's the same when you drive a self-driven Tesla car. God forbid if you hit someone, injure someone, or kill someone. Who's responsible? Is it the Tesla AI, or is it you as a driver? There are a lot of unanswered questions, gray areas, but they need to be addressed from a regulatory perspective, from an individual bank's perspective, before we adopt the next wave of innovation. And thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
شكرا السعادة الدكتور، وشكرا أيضا على الالتزام بالوقت، وعندنا لك أسئلة كثيرة إن شاء الله.
أشكركم. شكرا جزيلا.
طيب يعني المحور الثالث وهو مهم جدا أيضا هو التنافسية العالمية كيف يمكن للمصارف الإسلامية قيادة السوق العالمي؟ هذا سؤال كبير وعنوان مؤتمر، وفيه الحقيقة أوراق ما شاء الله. مقدم الورقة البحثية هو سعادة الدكتور بلو لاولو دانياتا، فهو الأمين العام السابق لمجلس الخدمات المالية الإسلامية، وحاصل على درجة دكتوراه في الصيرفة والتمويل الإسلامي من الجامعة الإسلامية في ماليزيا، وماجستير إدارة الأعمال في تمويل الشركات. ومقدم الورقة وآمل الالتزام بالوقت أيضا لكي يكون لنا مجال لطرح الأسئلة وأيضا للأخوة المعقبين.
شكرا. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning to all of you. It is indeed an honor for me to be once again invited by البركة for this important global event. So I thank you for the invitation. My topic is to cover an assessment of the journey for the last 50 years or 5 decades of Islamic banking, and to see how the Islamic banks can compete globally in terms of leadership. How can they lead? So perhaps I try to be very brief because of time. I have an executive summary, and I have issues that I have covered in the executive summary. Over the last 50 years, the Islamic banking industry has proven its viability and profitability. We all know that. And for the last 2 days, we have been addressing and highlighting some of these challenges and how they can be overcome. So perhaps I will focus more on the challenges and then go straight to the recommendations based on my 2 decades of experience in the industry. We need to look at perhaps the challenges first. The Islamic banking industry has been growing, but at what rate? And in what sector? And using what products and services? The Islamic banking, supposedly we're supposed to focus more on Sharia complying instruments and products and services. There has been argument in the industry whether we should be Sharia compliant or just Sharia based. This debate has been going on for long, and it is still ongoing. Allahumma rahamu, recently, Sheikh Khurshid Ahmad, Dr. Khurshid Ahmad, is one of those that have been promoting Sharia based rather than Sharia compliant. For the first 50 years, the Islamic banking industry has been mimicking the conventional banking products. In certain jurisdictions, actually the industry doesn't even seem to be different, particularly in terms of when you are comparing the Islamic banking and the conventional banking products. So for us to address this, there has been issues or challenges related to the capacity of human capital in the Islamic banks at institution levels. We also have issues in terms of who is to structure the instrument. What are the liquidity management issues that are facing the Islamic financial institutions? These are all issues and challenges that are facing the industry. And in terms of the global status, before I address the challenges in more detail with key recommendations, is that the Islamic banking industry is still doing good. But compared to the global banking sector, it's still very small. It's still less than 5% of the global banking sector. And based on the IFSB stability report that is issued recently for the year 2024, the global Islamic banking assets cumulative average growth rate is, in terms of asset, is 10.72%. In terms of financing is 9.8%, while in terms of deposit is 8.7%, which is very good. But if you look at the year, specifically year by year, despite the pandemic, we are still doing well, but the Islamic capital market is eating more into the portion in terms of financing and in terms of even assets for the global Islamic financial services industry. Now, with $2.37 trillion, we still feel that, yes, a lot has been achieved. We need to celebrate these figures, but we also need to think of how we are going to lead, if we are at all to lead the industry. Now, in 15 countries, the Islamic banking sector has systemically achieved a significant percentage in terms of total assets of the industry. This is also based on the IFSB Stability Report 2024. But you will be surprised to see some Muslim densely populated countries or majority Muslim populated countries with a lower percentage in terms of the total assets. This is one of the key questions and the key challenges that we are facing. We have countries that you will see from the down, I don't need to mention, but where their population is about 90% Muslim, but the Islamic banking asset is still very small. What is happening is because of this mimicking of the conventional banking products. Maybe one of the reasons. It may be results as a result of the poor regulatory environment, or maybe so many other factors. Why do we have a country that is among the leading Muslim population country, the most populous Muslim country, but the Islamic banking share is still less than 5%, or is just about 5%? So this is something that we need to ask ourselves. Now, the GCC continued to maintain its leadership in terms of the total asset of the Islamic banking assets, but what is the percentage in terms of population of the entire GCC compared to the population of the global Muslim population? Of course, this reflects the time in terms of the financial capacity of the GCC countries in terms of their income and economic strengths. But still, we need to ask ourselves, why is the GCC, with about 15% or less than the total Muslim population globally, is still controlling the 62% of the Islamic banking assets? While in the G20, we have 3 countries that are Muslim countries. We have the Saudi Arabia, we have Turkey, and we have Indonesia, who are members of the G20. And they are actually having a significant population of the Muslim countries. But what is happening to the Islamic banking sector? Now, some of the key challenges, of course, is in terms of human capital. At the institutional level, I try to highlight the challenges at 3 levels: institutional level, as well as the industry, and as well as international level. The expertise at certain institutions, you go to many Islamic banks, while we engage with them when I was with the IFSB, is that you will see that the capacity of the talent that they have or they can hire is actually one of the key challenges that they have. They draw their staff mostly from the conventional banking sector, and then without a proper training and expertise, they will not be able to even to structure the product that is expected. They will not be able to communicate the product that is being structured by the banks. And also they have challenges with regard to liquidity management. They take so much deposit, but where do they invest? So these are some of the challenges that at institutional level they have. At the industry level, you still have the same issue, the regulators also having a challenge in terms of their capacity and expertise with regard to the Islamic banking philosophy, concept, products, and services. So the technical expertise is really lacking. You have consultants that are actually promoting Islamic banking, but when you ask them, when you engage with them, they know little. They ask you what you have as a central bank, and then they just structure something that is. So the central banks or the industry in general need to build the right expertise. Liquidity management tools is across all levels of the industry. You have the central banks being the lender of the last resort and able to provide the excess liquidity or the liquidity management tools that are needed for the banks to be able to manage the excess liquidity. We have some banks in certain jurisdictions that they have more deposits, but they don't know where to invest it. So that's really pose a big challenge. Insufficient capital for the Islamic banks. In certain jurisdictions, they come up with some specialized categories of banks which their capital requirement is less, so that makes them unable to compete. They don't have the capacity in terms of resources to be able to compete with big banks, especially the foreign banks or big conventional banks that are operating in these jurisdictions. Now, regulatory and legal frameworks are still challenges. My brother from the UK has already highlighted some of the tax reforms challenges in the UK. This is across all over. Most countries have the same problem. There are also challenges in terms of implementation of regulatory standards. The IFSB, I have the Deputy Secretary General here with us who has chaired one of the sessions. They have issued quite a number of standards, but how many of these jurisdictions really implemented these standards? They focus more on implementing of Basel standard rather than the Islamic financial service industry standards. This is also another challenge. And there is no harmonization in terms of the standard implementation. IFRS issue standard, IOP issue standards. So what happened to the implementation of the IOP standard compared to the IFRS for the Islamic financial institutions? These are things that we need to look at. At international level, political will of governments and patronage is a key challenge. Many governments don't want to really put forward the priority or the necessary consideration that is needed for the Islamic financial institutions. Even though they are Muslim majority countries, this is really a big challenge for the Islamic financial institutions, particularly Islamic banks, to be able to compete. Now, global trade finance. This is one of the greatest driver or critical factor that will drive the leadership of the Islamic finance, but is still very, very small in most of the countries. Even those jurisdictions that we have achieved 15% systemic significance, but the trade finance is very, very small in many countries. And this is what carries the volume. That's what speaks about the banking assets. That's what really drives the growth. So trade finance is another area that we have to look at international level. There should be some commitment to look into this. And then there is also an even adoption of implementation of regulatory standards, as I highlighted. And then poor global harmonization and standardization of products. In one jurisdiction, this particular product is permitted, tawarruk is permitted. In one jurisdiction, tawarruk is not permitted. The difference of opinion among the scholars is also another concern that we need to look into. Quickly, I made some recommended strategies, recommendation in terms of what to be done in order to expand and grow the global Islamic finance market for the Islamic banks. We need to have a holistic review and a complete overhaul of the Islamic banking approaches, products, services, and desired impact across institutions and industries, especially in countries where Islamic banking is systemically significant. Because the assets are there. The banking sector is growing, but there are problems that need to be addressed. So this holistic review in terms of switching the gear from Sharia compliant to Sharia based so that the universality of Sharia can be seen and can be adopted by many. Another thing is to develop specifically for the expansion and growth a 3 to 5 year strategic development plans that will address the key challenges that is being highlighted, both at institutional level and at industry level. This is going to look at the industry, the banking sector as a whole. This is something that we really need to focus. And then we need to develop and implement as well as monitor the global Islamic banking expansion and growth strategic plan by a multilateral stakeholders like the ISDB group, the OIC platform, as well as the Al-Baraka forum. I specifically make this recommendation to have this high-level kind of think tank that will focus and drive the growth. In the conventional banking sector, we have the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. That Basel Committee, we don't have its equivalent in terms of driving the strategy for the development of the industry. So we need to have a neutral multi-stakeholders to come together and come up with this strategic plan and ensure the implementation of this strategic plan and fund it as well. The academicians, the scholars, the standard setting bodies, the other stakeholders all need to be part of this initiative. Now, as a long-term strategy, I'm also recommending a multi-stakeholder and multilateral dimensional global Islamic finance advisory committee that will meet periodically to monitor and advise periodically accordingly, on the global performance of the implementation of this strategic plan. This is a high-level kind of recommendation, and I hope that this platform, Al-Baraka, and any member of this platform who is participating will be able to take off some of these key high-level recommendations. The design and signing of an Islamic trade finance agreement among the OIC member countries, we have been indirectly trying to see how we can push this agenda. The OIC need to put Islamic finance into its agenda and bring particularly trade finance as one of the key points to be discussed. How this is going to be implemented is subject to further discussion. And then another recommendation is for the Sharia-compliant global payment system to be established. This is a long-term and is very politically challenging and diplomatically challenging, but it's something that is need to be done. We are talking about gold standard. We talk about gold standard several times in many occasions, but the global payment system that is based on riba need to be looked at. If you are talking about having a complete Islamic banking system that is Sharia compliant or Sharia based, then this is one of the key necessity that I hope that it should be perhaps promoted. Now, when we are talking about the world mapping and resource distribution, this is based on the guidance of the key topics given to me by the organizers. That's why I come up with these personal recommendations. Is to have a strategy that will have a collective promotion of Islamic banking based on its economic value proposition rather than just it is being ethical or riba-free. We need to change the narratives. We all believe Islam and universality of Sharia is dynamic and is all-encompassing. So we need to really promote it based on the economic value perspective rather than that it's just being Sharia compliant or it is Islamic just because of the divine revelation. But we have to look at from the economic value perspective because it has better things to offer, better benefits to offer than the conventional banking. Now, we need to engage and convince the regional international multilateral development banks like the ADB, the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, to introduce Sharia-compliant products for their engagement with the Muslim-majority countries. We have engaged, we have participated in these IMF World Bank meetings and some of these multilateral development bank meetings. We have Muslim-majority banks, institutions and countries coming to participate and engage with these institutions. But the instrument that is being extended to most of these countries are actually not Sharia compliant, even though we have some of those countries, some of the countries that are actually donors to the IMF and the World Bank and some of these multilateral development banks. But in what instrument do they actually extend this financing to these institutions? What influence can they have to make sure that these institutions are actually coming back to Islamic finance? Recently, we had the development that the World Bank is actually somehow covering most of it is shaping, most of it is reducing its activities on Islamic finance, limiting it now mostly to certain jurisdictions like Malaysia and only that is being doing Islamic banking. So this is something that I think the G20 members or the members that are sitting on the board of these multilateral development institutions need to have the political will to push the Islamic finance agenda forward. And finally, these are recommendations at various levels, which I think these are an expansion because I use the methodology of 6 by 6. So that there are six challenges with a 6 recommendation kind of model in coming up with the recommendation that I have presented. So basically, this is a summary, but I think in view of time, maybe perhaps I will skip that. In conclusion, I try to summarize that if the Islamic banks are to lead the global markets, then we need to really fix our these challenges, and we really need to look at how we can work holistically and work towards having a more Sharia-based kind of Islamic banking rather than just Sharia compliant. So Sharia-based rather than Sharia compliant. And whether, just in response to maybe perhaps if you permit me, just one minute or less. Now we have the AI, we have promotion of AI and so on. To what extent is the AI going to be an enabler or a destroyer to the Islamic banking Sharia compliant agenda? This is something that we need to look at, because now you ask AI, it will generate answers, it will give you information that's related to Sharia, When we continue to go with Sharia compliant, the AI will give you answers that are Sharia compliant, but not necessarily practical and not necessarily Sharia or realistic. Thank you.
شكرا سعادة الدكتور. بدون شك كل مقومات النجاح للتنافسية العالمية موجودة في الصيرفة الإسلامية، هي تعتمد علينا بشكل كبير. اليوم الصيرفة الإسلامية تقدم للمسلمين وغير المسلمين، ولكن لا زال نحتاج إلى جهود كبيرة جدا. الآن حننتقل للأخوة الأفاضل المعقبون. عندنا المعقب الأول هو معالي التانسيري عبد الواحد بن عمر، وهو رئيس مجلس الإدارة بورصة ماليزيا، وأرجو أيضا الالتزام بالوقت. شكرا. تفضل.
Well, thank you, Chairman Abdul Muhsin. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me begin by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to the Board of Trustees of Al-Baraka Foundation for honoring me with the award last night. Indeed, it's not just an honor for me and the people who have served in the various organizations before, but it is very much an honor also to the entire Islamic finance fraternity in Malaysia. And I do hope that it will inspire us to do a lot more for the future. Now, on the three papers, let me begin by saying that all three speakers have prepared very comprehensive papers, I would say. Now, starting with Dr. Usman from Gatehouse Bank on the UK's legislative and legal challenges. It's 19 pages long, not as long as some of the others with 6 pages, but I think it's very comprehensive, looking at the global licensing hub for Sukuk, the ecosystem, fintech innovation and growth of the Islamic banking sector in the UK, and the 4 banks that he mentioned. Now, I must say that I'm impressed with the Gatehouse Bank's environmental efforts and the fact that they managed to turn around their performance in recent times, making decent money, about $3.2 million US dollars, based on asset size of about $1.5 billion US dollars. My view is that maybe 2 things. One is in terms of the issue of legislative neutrality. Whilst that may be applicable for non-Muslim countries, but if we can position Islamic finance as something which is sustainable, that promotes social justice, there can be some tax advantage. So instead of neutral, making it tax advantageous. So we have seen this being applied in Malaysia, for example, and others, where there are certain exemptions from stamp duties and so on, lowering the transaction costs. So for social finance, even for court benevolent loans, for example, I think there is actually a case where it can be promoted as something beneficial and can enjoy some tax benefits in terms of just being neutral. The other comment I would also add is in terms of the potential size of the market. No doubt that we have about 2 million Muslims in Britain. So if you look at an average of 4 persons per household, there's potentially 500,000 homes to be financed. And if you look at an average, say, £100,000, you're talking about £100 billion of addressable market from the Muslim population alone. So I guess the idea would be to look at such a big prospect, and I do hope that other Islamic financial institutions will be attracted to come and promote Islamic banking in the UK further. On the second paper by Dr. Wael Aid on innovation in Islamic banking. Now again, quite comprehensive with 16 slides covering all the known innovations like digital banking, blockchain, and AI. I must say that I do share his concerns on the issue of accountability, transparency, and the biasness of AI. I don't wish to add any further other than to remind us that when we talk about innovation, please make sure that it serves a real purpose and it must add value. So in this respect, I must say that there were some conversations yesterday about the derivatives and so on, which are questionable in terms of its Sharia compliantness. Another one would be in terms of cryptocurrency. Now, I do share the views of some scholars in Egypt, for example, in terms of not acknowledging cryptocurrency as something which is permissible. So my view is that how can something which is so speculative, akin to gambling, and something which does more harm than good can be permissible in Sharia. So I do hope that the scholars will revisit this and come up with a unified view on cryptocurrency. So make no mistake, I'm talking about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and not the stable coins or other real asset-backed tokenized items. Now, the third paper from Dr. Bello is on global competitiveness and how can Islamic banks lead the global markets. Now, this is very much a typical strategy paper, and as a former CEO, I love it, and it's actually quite executable. Maybe a couple of issues which he raised. Now, one is in respect of the size of the market. So he spoke about how come GCC has got a much bigger share. I think at the end of the day, it all depends on the wealth of the respective countries. So in wealthy countries, obviously, you have a lot more assets, and clearly, therefore, the addressable market is still a lot more. My view, however, is that if we can make sure that the wealth that you have is very much managed by your own people, you build up capacity in your respective countries, then you can make sure that most of the funds that are invested will be in Sharia-compliant assets, as well as in investments that will generate much bigger returns beyond financial returns in terms of creating business opportunities and creating employment opportunities, not just for people in your country, but in countries, particularly Muslim countries, that will need more help. Because when you outsource the management of these funds to third parties, they will decide where to invest in, and they will decide in terms of the kind of returns that will be generated, and they will look at it from their lens instead of your own lens. Now, the other one which I thought I would highlight would be in terms of the comments on too much emphasis on debt-based Sharia-compliant products, meaning ijara and so on. Now, I think it's important that before we condemn debt-based Islamic instruments to mimic that of conventional, we really have to look at the purpose. You have to look at the needs of the people. Now, both on the asset side as well as on the liability side. So, for example, in the case of the asset side, so people who want to obtain financing to buy a house, for example. And in a typical world, most of the borrowers, they are working people, they enjoy salaries, meaning that their monthly income is actually fixed. Now, at the same time, buying a property is also part of wealth creation for them. So naturally, the most suitable product for home financing would be something which is debt-based, where the person, the customer, will be able to actually borrow and pay fixed amount installments per annum based on their salaries and so on. And once the loan has been fully repaid, after 20 years, 25 years, they will own the asset 100%, and by that time, the value of the home would have been higher. And again, that's a part of wealth creation. So I think please do not simply condemn that base as being something which is bad. You really have to look at the purpose. Likewise, on the liability side, so when people put their money in banks, Islamic banks, there is that expectation of protection, of safety, because these are surplus funds that they need for their rainy days, right? And for them to put monies into something which is profit sharing, where they can risk losing their principal, would not be workable for them, right? Which is very different from someone who's got huge wealth, where beyond a certain amount, yes, they can afford to take risks, afford to lose their principal and so on. So again, my point here is actually, please do take into account the circumstances, the needs of people, very much purpose-based, like what Dr. Usman mentioned in his presentation earlier. Now, I guess that's something which I thought I will mention. And again, my final request would be, in everything that we do, please don't forget to look at the purpose. Everything must be driven by purpose. And I think, inshallah, if you anchor everything on purpose, and I think you will progress well. Now, in Dr. Bello's paper, of all his recommendations, if there is one thing I would pick as having the most significant impact, would be the need to develop the Sharia-compliant global payment system. We have seen how the current SWIFT system, for example, can be weaponized. When someone doesn't like what you're doing, if they stop allowing you access to that system, it will be disastrous, right? For big economies, maybe they can find alternatives, but for small countries, it will be very difficult. So I think from the perspective of a globalized world, beyond looking at the Sharia needs, it's also important to have a diversified structure of the global payment system, and having a Sharia compliant one would certainly add value. Thank you.
شكرا لمعاليك، وأيضا سيكون هناك مجال إن شاء الله للمناقشة بعد انتهاء المعقب الثاني، وهو سعادة الأستاذ الدكتور منذر قحف، أستاذ الاقتصاد والتمويل الإسلامي، كلية الاقتصاد والإدارة، جامعة اسطنبول، صباح الدين زعيم. تفضل مشكورا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Allow me first, please, to thank the organizers of this forum, and it is really interesting, and it's getting more also in depth with time. I know that the ideas are very important in this regard, and I like to be very brief also. The legal aspect, I think it belongs to the whole world, wherever Islamic banks may exist or do exist now. And a major point in this legal aspect is to level the ground on the definitions of the products themselves, where the products of conventional banks are well defined, well known in laws, and the products of Islamic finance are absent. They are left to the Sharia board or to the Sharia expert or outside, or even to non-obligatory standards, professional standards done by some organizations. So the leveling the ground in reality requires defining the products of Islamic finance. And once this is done, then that takes us to the second point, to see whether these Islamic financial products really make a difference, that make them, give them the potentiality to lead in the market. If they make a real difference, they may be attractive on their own selves. But if they don't really make a real difference, you cannot really be leading at the global level. So to lead at the global level, you need to make that difference. In my opinion, the essential difference between Islamic finance and interest-based finance, it's its relation to the real market on a one-to-one basis. One-to-one correspondence. There cannot be Islamic finance transactions without being accompanied by real market transaction, goods or services or assets moving from one hand to another hand. That means the Islamic financial intermediation itself, it's really not only financial intermediation, it's a dual intermediation. It's financial and at the same time commercial. It requires goods to be moved in the market. So this aspect has not been put forward in a clear way to make the difference in the mind of both theoreticians and practitioners. The second point which I want to mention, or rather the third, do we really need to have indebtedness be less costly than having a partner with us? When we carrying a creditor is better than or is cheaper than carrying a partner? This matter means that why debts are made cheaper in the existing financial system than sharing. And so this equation, debt is cheaper, I think it's because of the structure of the capitalist system, capitalist financial system. And this is probably we need to reconsider. There was an idea in the previous session that localizing finance might be an option, might be an alternative. Localizing finance is useful. It could be an alternative, but I think we need to give due consideration to answering this question, why indebtedness should be cheaper than carrying a partner. So if we answer this equation, probably when we look at our Islamic classical tradition, both theoretical and practical, we may find some different position really on this matter. And unless we change this equation, then we are still working within the capitalist model of financial intermediation. If we change this equation from that makes indebtedness cheaper than carrying a partner, then probably we can go out of the box and think then of using the AI and the other fintech products in a way that can localize finance instead of creating big monsters institutions. Do we need these monstrous institutions? That's a question that is a serious one when we discuss Islamic finance itself and look at its future. If we want to offer something that is useful to the world, probably we need to answer that question exactly, that indebtedness should not be cheaper than carrying a partner. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Thank you.
جزاك الله خيرا وشكرا. بارك الله فيكم جميعا. يعني I would go from your last question. It used to be 10 years ago, I agree totally with you, at least in our GCC market. Today, I am sure Islamic financing, even in debt, is not more expensive than commercial. The competition imposed in those Islamic banking, and there is ways and tools. One of them, be efficient in your management, use the technology, lower the cost, and then you will have edge. Because if you are more expensive, then you will lose your market. I will open the floor, but if you allow me, please. Now we will have open discussion about all session members for 10 minutes, and then we will leave also 15 minutes for the floor. Any comments or question could be directed to any of one. If just to throw points, يعني we will take it يعني بننطلق محور. أنا رحت الإنجليزي آسف. المحور الأول التحديات التشريعية والقانونية. أنا بأرمي 3 نقاط. It's open. Anyone can go and comment. في التحديات التشريعية والقانونية، أولاً في نقطة اختلاف الأطر التنظيمية بين الدول، فمع أن المبادئ الشرعية واحدة إلا أن تطبيقها وتفسيرها يختلف من دولة إلى أخرى. هذا تحدي. ما هو الحل؟ النقطة الثانية أيضا النقص في التشريعات. نجد أن بعض الدول عندها ما شاء الله تشريعات جيدة، بعض الدول أقل، حتى في الدول الإسلامية. فكيف أيضا نحل هذه الإشكالية ونستفيد من بعض، يعني يكون التكامل على الأقل بين دولنا، مع أنه في كثير من المصارف الإسلامية الآن راحت أيضا للدول غير الإسلامية، والمنتجات كما أشرنا يجب أن تكون متاحة للمسلمين وغير المسلمين. النقطة الثالثة أيضا التعامل مع القوانين الدولية، خاصة في الأسواق غير الإسلامية، التحديات اللي تواجه المصارف الإسلامية، كيف نحل هذا؟ فالمجال مفتوح لأي واحد منكم للتعليق على أي من هذه النقاط.
اختلاف التشريعات والقوانين من دولة لأخرى، هذا مش بس الإسلاميك فاينانس، في الجميع. الإسلاميك فاينانس عليه قبول، يعني الديماند از زير. أخونا الدكتور شاودري لما اتكلم عن جيت هاوس، أنا عشت في إنجلترا فوق 10 سنين وشفت الديماند من المسلمين وغير المسلمين for an ethical alternative mode of finance. إنجلترا أو بريطانيا مثلا من الدول اللي غيرت في التشريعات to accommodate، غيرت بعض مش كل منها، أهم حاجة التاكس والدبل ستامب ديوتي. عشان كده لقيت 4 بنوك إسلامية أو 5 في بريطانيا. في دول أوروبية أخرى الديماند موجود، واحنا بنتكلم على التشريعات في الدول غير الإسلامية، الديماند من السكان موجود أو population، ولكن للأسف السنترال بانك أو الدولة ما بتغير من القوانين لأسباب أو أخرى، فهتلاقي إن عدد المسلمين فيهم أكبر من عدد المسلمين في بريطانيا مثلا، ولكن بسبب التشريعات الإسلاميك بانكينج أو الإسلاميك فاينانس إن جنرال ما حصل له البوست. منها ألمانيا، منها فرنسا، حتى الانترناشنال انفستورز. يعني النهارده ما بشتغل في مؤسسة في الخليج وبنستثمر اون اسلاميك فاينانس، هتلاقي انجلترا او النمبر 1 في الاسلاميك فاينانس في يوروب، لان التشريعات تسمح لك كانترناشونال. تروح دول اخرى التشريعات للانترناشونال انفستورز اللي هم بيخشوا على ميجا سكيل، مش ريتيل انفستمنت، بيخشوا على ميجا بروجكتس، التشريعات ما تساعدك في الاسلاميك فاينانس، فيو شاي اواي فروم ذيس ماركت. كيف نحلها؟ اعتقد لازم المنظمات الاسلاميه والاسلاميك ديفلوبمنت بانك والايوفي تشتغل مع الديسيجن ميكرز في هذه الدول on a macro level, central banks, political parties, awareness and then implementation. Same like happened في انجلترا في بريطانيا. مش بس هيخلي اللوكال ماركت الريتيل Islamic finance customers يعني مبسوطين، هم the demand is there, there's no question the demand is there. تخلي الانترناشونال انفستور to flow into this market. بس والله أعلم.
تفضل دكتور.
We need to present legal samples that can fit different constituencies. And legal samples are not really available. What is available now are standards, and standards are very different from legal samples. Presenting legal samples at the world level is, in my opinion, very important. And basic in it is to define the Islamic finance products on both fund mobilization and fund utilization. These are not defined. yet. These are left to the Sharia board, and you find differences in their definition from one place to another. And we were told just a few minutes ago about the Islamic compliant and Islamic base, although this is an old kind of thing, but really it is irrelevant once you define them in the law. So once they are defined in the law, the whole issue will not come. We need to present samples in order to carry the Islamic finance or Islamic banking industry forward.
شكرا. تفضل دكتور.
Thank you. Maybe perhaps I go with the last one. Changing legislation or legal frameworks in many countries is quite challenging because the process is really enormous. And the constitutions really have some impediments that are in place which cannot be changed directly. So if we are to, and it is not the central banks doesn't want to change actually. The process of changing by the central banks is quite challenging, just to address you. Because we work, while I was with the IFSB, we work with many central banks and we know the challenges they are going through, and they are willing actually to partner and learn from other central banks that have implemented. So I think is a continuous engagement and to have a global platform whereby such global platform will be able to maybe address it with a common goal and objective for among these countries. Unless we define that common goal to develop the Islamic finance and to work together, then that strategic collaboration among the legal and not only legal in terms of even harmonization of the standards of products is not going to be achieved. So that's one thing. And then another point regarding to the standardization, I mean, we are all aware that we have many jurisdictions with different mazhabs and with different reasons in terms of which is acceptable, what is not acceptable, based on the mazhab that they are following. But in terms of achieving a common goal of implementing and revolutionizing the financial system, we have seen a strong commitment recently by the government of Pakistan, whereby it gives a deadline for change of the total legislation to convert into Islamic finance rather than the conventional finance. So it has to do with the political will of a particular country. Political will is really, really essential. And it has to be all levels, top down, bottom up, top down the policy, bottom up the commitment. So I think that's something that's really need to be looked into. The second part of the question, which I have missed, the second point, I think it also has to do with some kind of a common platform, a strategic one, whereby if, for example, now we take trade finance as an example, as I recommended, that the OIC will now be the platform, because it will be very difficult to have one single standard setting body to issue standard and ask everybody to implement the standards, because some of these standards, whether it is accounting or whether it is prudential, it has different levels of implementation depending on the country. So a common platform like the OIC or the Al-Baraka or any other multilateral Islamic financial body that will be able to take the lead to coordinate and identify the problems, and then I think we can be able to achieve something. We need to start one after the other. Let's take maybe trade finance, for example. This is something because it's a global trade that we do globally between countries to countries. So I think if we take that and all transactions going through the Islamic finance structure and through the Islamic banks, we will be able to achieve, inshallah.
If I take the UK perspective again, as I said, 1982, the Al-Baraka Group launched its first branch in the UK. Was the legislative environment conducive to Islamic finance then? No, it wasn't. Like anything, you need to put a spade in the ground, one foot in front of the other, and start somewhere. And what that branch did was create a seed, and then we cultivated the political will. It will not come on its own. You have to cultivate it over decades, and we continue to do that. And to do that chiefly is achieved through a common voice. So where we have organizations and multiple Sharia organizations and Sharia-compliant banks and fintechs, etc., this is great, but can also lead to fragmentation. And so when we have discussions with the central bank in the UK and the government lawmakers, we're there every 3 months lobbying. They say the problem is not to change the law. We can do that. Show us the demand. There are all these Sharia organizations in the UK, and there's only one or two coming to speak with us. Where is the voice that you have? So the demand from the customer is there, the political will is there, but it's the Sharia organizations that don't seem to coalesce with a common voice. And the more we see that, the faster we see change. And a practical example, just 3-4 months ago in the UK, the government issued a consultation on tax law directly because we lobbied them, not through Sharia scholars per se. These were Clifford Chance law firms. We paid for it. We lobbied the government, lawmakers, and they issued the consultation on alternative finance and Islamic finance. It was then passed into law 3 months later. Not difficult per se, but you need to cultivate this. And I think if we start to cultivate these little seeds in all these jurisdictions, we'll get there, but we do need to have a common voice.
Thank you. Yeah, تفضل معاليك.
If I may. Sorry,
I want to carry the discussion to the other point, which is, I think, more important, that are we offering something that is attractive, that is better? That's an important issue. The existing business model of Islamic banks makes indebtedness cheap, and which is the same model of the conventional bank. So a comparison is not that Islamic cheaper or more expensive. The comparison is indebtedness is cheaper than other way of financing. Why this happened? We carried in the Islamic banking the same business model of conventional bank. We did not carry a vision, futurist vision in it. So unless we change that, we cannot really lead, because there is no need for us then. If we are the same, there's no need for us.
We are not the same. If you see 10 years ago and now, so please go, Your Excellency.
Thank you. I just wanted to weigh in on the earlier comments about how come UK is leading in Europe, not Turkey and Germany, for example. I think one of the issues is related to the issue of harmonization of standards and legal framework. So I think for a country like Turkey, for example, they have the concept of participation finance, and understand that they're now developing standards which are very different from what we have at our fee and so on. So I think there must be enhanced engagement level at the political, at industry level, working level, to make sure that they adopt something which is already there. And when we have that harmonized standards, the prospects for growth will be much greater. And I have no doubt that if we can work this with Turkey, Europe will be a good place where Islamic finance can grow. Thank you.
شكرا. Thank you very much. أنا أعتقد التحديات التشريعية عندنا مسارين. المسار على داخل البلد، لأن اليوم لا زال في نقص على مستوى البنوك المركزية. يعني لا يمكن تشريعات الإشرافية والرقابية على البنك التقليدي هي التي تطبق على البنك الإسلامي، ولا زلنا نعاني. فيجب أن يكون هناك عمل كيف نحل هذا التحدي على مستوى داخل البلد، لأنه سيكون أسهل، ثم ننطلق على مستوى الدول أيضا. وربما يكون المسار الآخر قد يكون بقيادة المنتدى البركة مع اتحاد المصارف. اتحاد المصارف العربية مثلا عنده حوالي 400 عضو، فيكون فوكس جروب يجتمعون يناقشون كيف نحد هذا التحدي، ولعلها تكون فيها توصيات إن شاء الله جيدة. النقطة مهمة جدا أثارها الدكتور عثمان، يقول الريجوليتر في اليوكي قال شو مي الديماند وأنا مستعد تشينج. لذلك كيف نزيد عدد المستخدمين للصيرفة الإسلامية من غير المسلمين؟ هذا سؤال كبير جدا، وأنا أعتقد هي الجودة. ويمكن الكلام اللي يتكلم عنه الدكتور يجب أن نكون على كفاءة عالية في تقديم المنتج، ويكون بسعر منافس جدا، لأنه دائما التكلفة فيرسز الكواليتي، يعني هي اللي بتكون محدد أساسي. وأنا وجدت أنه في نمو كبير في الصيرفة الإسلامية من ناحية الكاستمر بيس، لكن لا زال كحجم أقل منه، لكن النمو يتزايد. إذا زاد الديماند، يعني لو رجعنا ال50 سنة الماضية الصيرفة الإسلامية فرضت نفسها فرضا، وبالتالي نحن الآن يعني الاعتراف، وهذا خلاص مرحلة سابقة عن الفيوتشر. الآن ما هي المرحلة القادمة؟ إذا تسمحون لي أنا بفتح المجال للحضور، وأرجو أن يكون يعني التعريف باسمك if you will your organization، بعدين باختصار شديد ودايركت السؤال لأي متحدث. تفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد. دكتور محي الدين حجار، كبير باحثين في معهد الاقتصاد الإسلامي في معهد البنك الإسلامي للتنمية. سأتداخل في بعض النقاط المتعلقة بالعوائق القانونية، وسأركز على بعض ما
بالله باختصار شديد لأن الوقت
نعم.
يمضي عشان نتيح المجال.
باعتبار أن لي خبرة طويلة في تنمية التمويل الإسلامي في أوروبا، وتحديدا في أوروبا الفرنكوفونية، فرنسا وبلجيكا وسويسرا تحديدا، أنا لا أوافق على اعتبار العوائق القانونية من أهم التحديات في اتجاه تنمية المالية الإسلامية. منها ما تفضل منه به الدكتور شودري، أن بنك البركة بدأ نشاطه في بريطانيا دون وجود إطار قانوني خاص به، والآن الإطار القانوني الخاص بالمالية الإسلامية في فرنسا مثلا، باعتبارها أقل الدول تطورا في هذا المجال، في مجال التطبيق العملي، الإطار القانوني للمالية الإسلامية في فرنسا مطابق تقريبا للإطار القانوني للمالية الإسلامية في بريطانيا. فلماذا عندنا جهة فيها تطبيق قوي جدا للمالية الإسلامية وجهة فيها تطبيق ضعيف جدا؟ هناك إشكاليات متعلقة بالبعد السياسي، الإرادة السياسية، بحيث أنه في فرنسا الآن عندنا إرادة سياسية أننا لا نريد شيء إسلامي، عندنا إرادة. وباعتبار شاركنا مثلا في بعض ورش العمل التي تنظمها الهيئات الرقابية، يقول يعني ما في شيء مكتوب، ولكن توجيه الشفوي عندما يكون هناك أسماء نو كونوتاسيون، يعني أسماء ذات صبغة، لم يقل هو شيء أنه أسماء عربية أو إسلامية، فيجب مباشرة أن تفتح تحقيق بموضوع تبييض الأموال وتمويل الإرهاب فأنت تضع مباشرة عوائق تجاه التمويل الإسلامي بشكل حقيقي وفاعل ودون أن تسمي شيء. فأنت عندك إرادة سياسية سلبية. والنقطة الأخرى التي لم يشر لها أحد من السادة الباحثين في المداخلات، أن لابد من أن يكون لدينا أيضا جهات فاعلة اقتصادية محلية. فوضع المسلمين، أنا لا أقول الجالية الإسلامية، لأن هؤلاء المسلمين في الغرب، مسلمو الغرب، ليسوا جالية أجنبية مقيمة في هذه البلاد، وإنما هم من أهل هذه البلاد من أكثر من 150 سنة أو حتى 200 سنة فيها. فمسلمو الغرب كبنية اجتماعية ليس لديها القدرة في بعض الدول وخاصة في فرنسا
شكرا لك الله
على أن تطلق مشاريع من هذا المجال. والنقطة الأخيرة لو سمحتم لي،
يا شيخ.
نعم، نقطة أخيرة
ناخذها بعد الجلسة بالله.
فقط نقطة أخيرة لو سمحتم. الفينتك الآن هي أداة لدخول المالية الإسلامية إلى الغرب بشكل خاص، بسبب غياب الإطار القانوني، وبسبب أيضا عدم وجود متطلبات مالية كبيرة جدا لإطلاق المشاريع. والله أعلم.
شكرا لك. باختصار شديد، ما شاء الله الأيدي كثيرة، لكن باختصار شديد عشان نتيح المجال لأكبر عدد. تفضل طال عمرك. المايك هنا بالله، واللي بعده يرفع يده عشان ياخذ المايك الثاني.
شكرا جزيلا بروفيسور أحمد مجذوب أحمد، أستاذ في الاقتصاد الإسلامي، وعملت في القطاع المالي من الوزارة والإدارة إلى آخره، يعني خبرة أكثر من 30 سنة
ما شاء الله،
وصديق ومشارك في البركة منذ العام 1411 للهجرة، يعني مقدم للأوراق أو مناقش أو معقب. الحقيقة داير أقول إنه يعني ما أثير من قضايا في هذا المنتدى أنا في تقديري من الأهمية بمكان، وكل محور من هذه المحاور بالتأكيد يستحق أن يفرض له منتدى خاص. وما تم من تداول أشار إلى رؤوس الموضوعات التي ينبغي أن يتم الاهتمام بها. فأقترح على إدارة المنتدى أن تتبنى من هذه العناصر عناوين لمنتديات أخرى، وبدل أن يكون سنويا أن تعقد كل 3 أشهر أو 4 أشهر بحسب الحال، وتوسع شراكاته وحتى نخرج بمخرجات مفيدة إن شاء الله. أنا حقيقة هذه مقدمة.
هذا اقتراح جميل، شكرا لك.
المقترح الثاني في تقديري، نحن حقنا نناقش التحديات وفقا لمستوياتها. عندنا تحدي داخلي داخل المصرفية الإسلامية نفسها، وعندنا تحدي داخل البعد القطري، ثم بعد ذلك عندنا التحدي على المستوى الإقليمي. أنا في تقديري ينبغي علينا أن نصنف هذه التحديات حتى نتبنى مقترحات لمعالجاتها. أنا في تقديري سيظل الإطار التشريعي تحدي قائم، وبيحتاج أن تفرض له يعني ورشة خاصة حتى ولو جانبية من باب تقديم حلول مرتبة يتم تبنيها من بعد ذلك. المحور الآخر الذي لا يقل أهمية اللي هو المحور الفقهي اللي بيمثل مرجعية في الاختيارات. أنا في تقديري نحن حتى الآن لم نبلور الاختيارات الفقهية في شكل نظري لكل جهة، يعني تتبنى خيارا فقهيا بصورة تديه المقبولية لدى الآخرين وتمنح الخصائص التي تميز أيضا عن الخيارات الأخرى بصورة تجعل فريد، وبالتالي هذا التعدد يكون سبيل للإثراء وليس سبيل لإضعاف المصرفية الإسلامية من أنها لم تقدم رؤية واضحة تعين على تطوير المصرفية. التحدي الآخر والأخير اللي هو تحدي في إطار مجتمعاتنا الإسلامية نفسها، في أن هل خياره هو التكلفة أم خياره هو الخيار الأخلاقي. الحديث كثير ويطول، لكن حتى نتيح فرصة للآخرين نكتفي بذلك، وشكرا جزيلا.
في عندنا أكثر من طالب، ترى الوقت محدود جدا، تفضل باختصار شديد بالله، تفضل الله يحفظك.
شكرا جزيلا. دكتور لطفي السرحي، مستشار في البنوك الإسلامية اليمنية. الحقيقة عندي تساؤل على تعقيب الدكتور منذر حول جزئية المتعلقة بالمداينة أنها أرخص من المشاركة. تساؤل على تعريف هذا، لماذا هي أرخص؟ يعني أليس ندعو الآن والتوجه إلى تشجيع عمليات المداينة أكثر من المشاركة؟ أليست المشاركة أدعى أو أكثر أثرا على الاستثمار الحقيقي أو على الإنتاج الحقيقي في هذه الجانب؟ يعني شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا لك، تفضل الله يحفظك.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. شكرا لهذا اللقاء العلمي الباذخ تنظيما ومشاركة. فيما يبدو أن الفرق من بين الفروقات الجوهرية بين المصرفية التقليدية والمصارف التقليدية والمصارف الإسلامية هو وجود مرجعية. بالنسبة للمصارف التقليدية يكاد أن تكون دولية، بينما قد تغيب هذه المرجعية الملزمة بالنسبة للمصارف الإسلامية. فلماذا لا يكون مثلا للأيوفي على سبيل المثال مرجعية أساسية في هذه المصارف ملزمة كما هو الحال بالنسبة لاتفاقية بازل على سبيل المثال؟ الأمر الآخر، النقطة الثانية على عجالة، مسألة الخيار بين التكلفة والشرعية والالتزام الشرعي، في تصوري أن هذا مبني على القناعة والإقناع، أو على الإقناع والقناعة والاقتناع. ما لم يكن هناك اقتناع فتبقى التكلفة هي الخيار للكثير من الأشخاص، بدليل أن رغم كما ذكر في إحدى الأوراق أن العالم الإسلامي بما يمثله من ثقل سكاني، فإن انتشار المصارف أو عدد المتعاملين أو حصة الصيرفة الإسلامية من السوق يبقى محدودا مقارنة بالصيرفة أو المصارف التقليدية. لا أدرك تماما أن الوقت عامل في هذا الجانب، عامل حاسم جدا، لأنه ولدت المصارف الإسلامية في زمن لعلي عذرا إن شبهت بولادة الدعوة الإسلامية في عصر كانت تسيطر فيه الجاهلية فواجهت ما واجهت. كذلك هو الحال لما ولدت هذه المصارف، وجدت في عالم يسيطر عليه الفكر التقليدي الرأسمالي، وبالتالي وجهت بما وجهت به. فهل مثل هذه الأمور تعتبر من بين العوائق؟ شكرا جزيلا، وأسأل الله التوفيق.
شكرا. آخر مداخلة بناخذ من الأخت آخر القاعة، والأيدي اللي رفعت تعذرني لضيق الوقت، لأنه نبهت أكثر من مرة من المنظمين الوقت انتهى، وحنتيح 30 ثانية يعني 30 seconds each speaker to comment. تفضلي.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Professor Zurina from Malaysia. I hear what Dr. Bello has mentioned about the need for trade facilitation of Muslim countries, and as you're having experience in FSB and also in other markets as well, how do you see that our multilateral organization will have to champion this? And then also maybe Tan Sri could also respond on what will be the leadership of Malaysia for ASEAN, as we are as the leading the chairmanship for ASEAN, to lead Islamic finance.
شكرا. Thank you very much. باختصار شديد بالله تفضل باختصار، ما في وقت بالله، أقل من دقيقة.
دكتور عبد الرحمن النوفلي من عضو هيئة شرعية في البنك الأهلي الإسلامي العماني.
أهلا وسهلا.
تحدثتم كثيرا عن موضوع الفنتك والصكوك الرقمية وكذا، لكن دون أن نرى شيء من المعايير التي تواكب هذا التطور. ربما سنأتي بعد سنوات طويلة ونجد أننا متأخر. لماذا لا نستبق الوضع وتخرج وصايا وتخرج إرشادات تؤيد هذا الموضوع، ولا نكون متأخرين عن البنوك أو عن المعايير التقليدية؟ شكرا.
شكرا لك، نقطة مهمة. لكن أنا بقترح على كثير من الدول. أنا مريت بدول تقدمت جدا في الفنتك وتقدمت في الديجيتال بانكينج، ولكن للأسف الشديد التعاون بين كدول محدود. المملكة العربية السعودية مثلا سوت من 7 سنوات ساند بوكس وبدت في الفنتك. أنا أذكر الإنما بانك أسس شركة فنتك كاملة في 2018 وأعطاها اسم غير اسم البنك، وفيه أنظمة وفي تشريعات وفي جدا ممتازة. أنا أقول للي بيبدأ لا يخترع العجلة من جديد، يستفيد من هذه الأنظمة، والمفروض هي تعاون دول، والدول مفتوحة ترى على بعض. أنا أعرف المملكة في كثير من الأنظمة اللي جتها دول فلنتيرلي، وأنت تقيم وتطبق، لا تبدأ من الصفر زي ما قلت. الآن I will give each speaker please also each members 30 seconds to comment on anything. It's open. So please, I will start from the last. Yeah, go ahead.
I call for changing the business model of the Islamic bank. We shouldn't carry the same business model of conventional bank. Cheap deposits, and then we can offer cheap debt. That's not the appropriate business model.
It's a very important point. Thank you very much. تفضل معنا.
I think the problem is not with the debt per se. The problem is actually with the expectation of returns on equity. So we had in the past trying to encourage investors from GCC to invest in Malaysia, but their expectation of returns for equity is something like 20% per annum. But when they go to US, they can accept an 8% return. So I think that is something which we need to address. To the question from Professor Zurina, Indonesia is the largest Muslim country, the largest economy, and in terms of the approach towards Islamic financing is very similar to Malaysia. So I think collaborating together and within the context of Malaysia being the chair of ASEAN is basically to promote the greater intra-ASEAN trade and investment, and with that, naturally, Islamic finance will grow within ASEAN as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. As a follow-up to that question, perhaps we have quite a number of multilateral platforms whereby Islamic trade finance can be put to table and strategically being pushed forward. We have the D8 is one of the platform, the D8 Developing Muslim Economics, and then we also have the OIC, where we have majority of all the Muslim countries are there. So trade finance can be one of those to be put on the agenda. We have the IDB, Islamic Development Group, which is also having about quite a number of members among the Muslim countries who are also members. So trade finance can be put to the table. So this is another platform. Another platform is the regional organizations, regional bodies like the ASEAN, for example. But it's a great opportunity, and I thank you for raising this question in front of Tansri, and Prof. Azmi is here, and Brother Abdullah is here as well, so that this can reach the ears of the Malaysian government as well as Bank Negara has been putting effort to push Islamic trade finance. Finally, we need to look at the definition of Sharia. We need to ask ourselves, do you really understand what Sharia means? What Sharia means in response to that? Sharia is about pleasing Allah. By mimicking conventional banks, are we really pleasing Allah? Or by coming up with the original principles of Sharia to implement in our finance relationship, mu'amalat, we are actually pleasing Allah. So it's about pleasing Allah. That's what Sharia is all about.
شكرا.
Thank you.
تفضل دكتور ب30 ثانية.
Islamic banking and finance has the ingredients to serve us and be better ethical mode of finance for Muslims and non-Muslims than conventional banking, because it's coming from divine sources. But instead of using its ethical foundations, they're trying to copy what's conventional, copy into an Islamic Sharia structure. By that, they're foregoing their ethical principles and limiting their capabilities. Islamic banking will not flourish as long as they're trying to copy. It's only when they innovate, stick to original principles, and try to innovate, they will surpass and flourish for Muslims and non-Muslims.
تفضل دكتور.
2 points. I'll keep it short. I just want to echo Brother Wahid's point regarding shareholder interest and appetite, and the point made in the audience earlier around conviction. If there was greater conviction, and this is what we need by the international Islamic banks, into non-Muslim countries such as the UK and Western Europe, then you'd have hopefully a greater catalyst for growth where lower shareholder returns are tolerated, right, for the greater good. I think that's a key matter. Again, that's a shareholder and stakeholder balancing equation. The other point for the brother over there, I reiterate my point. We have discussed matters with the French Central Bank. They came to see us. There is a will there, but I think you need to cultivate it, and it takes time. So yes, we're not without our challenges in the West, absolutely, but it takes time and patience.
شكرا. باسمي واسم المنظمين أشكر الأخوة المتحدثين في ختام هذه الجلسة، جزاكم الله خيرا وأثابكم. كذلك أيضا لا يفوتني أن أشكر جميع الحضور على التفاعل الكبير، ويعذرونا اللي ما أخذنا مداخلاتهم وأسماءهم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.